bless you. Ugh. A little bit. If you zoom out on that picture, look at the background of the picture that I posted that on. You see the bricks on the background and the red stripe? I chose it on purpose. What do you think that dark red is supposed to symbolize? What?
Blood.
Yes. There was a lot of bloodshed for the civil rights movement.
Wow.
What do you think the bricks, the dark red bricks, are meant to symbolize? Zoom out. Zoom out. Look at the PowerPoint slide, the background of the PowerPoint slide.
They're on the side.
They are. Anybody been to the Lorraine Motel in Memphis?
No.
No one?
No. It looks a little bad.
Well, it looks like old bricks, does it not?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Lorraine Motel is where Dr. King was shot and killed. Brick facade, where he fell, white concrete. You can still see blood stain on the concrete where he bled. I chose that background for the symbolism because literally there was a lot of brick walls around there, but also because the people that were having to fight for rights felt like they're banging their heads against brick walls. So that background was chosen for its symbolism. Okay. And I'm going to zoom in so we can see the words a little bit better. And by the way, here's the background I'm talking about. See the bricks? See the red? Really? I told her to get bigger and it got way smaller. Fabulous. Okay. The civil rights movement was a struggle for social justice. And let's go down and see what it says, social justice. Oh, wow. It gives us a number and then it doesn't give us what social justice means. Fabulous. I'll look it up in a moment. For social justice, it took place mainly during the 1950s and 1960s for African Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. Again, let me look up social justice real quick, okay? I have a general idea of what it is, but I want to make sure I give you a good short definition. It says social justice is fairness as it manifests in society. So struggle for societal fairness. Okay. So we're not talking about fairness in courts. We're talking about fairness in society. Those things that making sure when you go to a store, everybody is treated fairly in a store. Everybody can go to the same store, that kind of thing. Do you remember what it was called? Those laws that kept people apart in stores and in schools. Jim Crow laws. Remember? They had it in the clouds, the picture, right? Okay. So fighting for social justice meant fighting to get away from Jim Crow laws. Okay. Civil rights movement was a struggle for social justice. It took place mainly during the 1950s and 1960s for African Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. The Civil War had officially abolished slavery, but it did not end discrimination against African Americans. They continued to endure the devastating effects of racism, especially in the South. By the mid-20th century, in other words, 1950s, African Americans had had more than enough prejudice and violence against them. They, along with many whites, mobilized, meaning they got together and started doing things, and began an unprecedented fight for equality that spanned 2 decades. How long is a decade?
20,
10 years. So if it spanned 2 decades, it means it spanned 20 years. Okay. Jim Crow laws. During Reconstruction, African Americans took on leadership roles like never before. They held public office and sought legislative changes for equality and the right to vote. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution gave African Americans equal protection under the law. In 1870, so just 2 years later, the 15th Amendment granted African Americans the right to vote. Still, many whites, especially those in the South, were unhappy that people they had once enslaved were now on a more or less equal playing field. So, guys, I had people in here asking me why white people were being so mean then. I had people in second block asking me that, people in third block asking me that. That's the nicest answer that can be given. Why were people being so mean to African Americans in the South? Southern whites were mad because the people that they had once enslaved and made them work for them were now on a more or less equal playing field. Number 10. You had 5 pencils in a case, right? You didn't have pencils left out? Okay, so they're in your desk. Give me a second. Give me a second. Don't go. I'm sure there were many more reasons, but that's the shortest and nicest way to express why people were acting the way they were. Okay. One of my grandfathers, his distant relatives from the 1800s had owned a plantation, and they had a lot of enslaved people. And that grandfather was a very hateful man. He was hateful towards his own wife. He had a hate-filled heart. He wasn't someone I liked at all. His own kids, I would say, were more scared of him than anything else because he was just a hateful person and mean. It's not a nice person to be around. He was one that would speak very racist words. And I was quite happy just to go see my grandmother. My grandfather wanted to go outside and smoke his cigar. I know. I'd prefer if he wasn't in the house because he's very hateful. And that just wasn't how I was. He was. My grandmother, his own wife, that had lived with him for over 50 years, she wasn't like that. She had a very kind heart. I don't know how she could put up with her husband being so hateful. But he was. He was one that was, I mean, in the 1990s, still full of hate. And that's a real hard thing to see, you know. His father had been in the state legislature for Louisiana. In other words, he's a lawmaker down in Baton Rouge. I never met his father, but I don't know if he was like him or not. I have no clue. But there were some people around still in the 90s that were just as hateful as what we've been reading about. He's been long dead many years now, but the most hateful person I ever met. All right. To marginalize African Americans, that means to push them to the side, to make them where they felt less important. keep them separate from whites and erase the progress they'd made during Reconstruction. Jim Crow laws were established in the South beginning in the late 19th century. African Americans couldn't use the same public facilities as whites, live in many of the same towns, or go to the same schools. Guys, there were actually cemeteries for African Americans and cemeteries for white people.
And I'm guessing the one for white people was a lot.
That's unnecessary.
Totally unnecessary. Actually, where my mother-in-law lived in forgetting the name of the town. Oh, it's not Franklin, Tennessee, but it's really close to Franklin, Tennessee. No, it's in Tennessee. Stop. Forgetting the little bitty town. It's right outside Franklin, Tennessee. The enslaved people's cemetery. After the war, people were freed, so it became a freedman's cemetery. And it was a really nice cemetery, just as nice as the white people's cemetery right beside it. And their fence lines were right next to each other. So you had an iron fence line around Greenwood Cemetery. It seems like every big city has a Greenwood Cemetery. You had a fence line around the white people's cemetery, Greenwood Cemetery, and you had an iron fence line around the Freedmen's Cemetery because it started out. It's totally unnecessary.
Why would you?
But what was sad was that they kept up the white people's cemetery and they covered up in the 1900s the African American cemetery.
Made it worse. You couldn't see no grave.
They put a parking lot over it.
They put a parking lot over dead body. What are you saying?
Yep.
Really crazy.
And my mother-in-law and father-in-law's dental office was in this 2-story log cabin on the river. And a big Civil War battle went on there. If y'all study Civil War battles, you might have actually studied this particular one. Columbia, that's what it's called, Columbia, Tennessee. So there's a Civil War battle in Columbia, Tennessee, and it took place right there at that cemetery over the river. And there's actually bullet holes in the tombstones, in the white people's tombstones, because they were taller. So it's kind of funny that their tombstones got defaced by the war. Ironic. So they were, the parking lot they put over the Freedmen's Cemetery was for a car parts company. And they put the car parts place there. When they were going to do something new to their parking lot, they ran some kind of Doppler or something over the ground and discovered all these square things underground. They're like, oh my gosh, this is not just paved ground, something is down there. Started digging, and it was the only one they'd ever found where it was very, very rich freedman's vaults. Only one like it in the US, apparently. Very unique cemetery. So they had to get rid of the parking lot, get rid of the auto parts store that had been put on top of it. That had to go away. The log cabin dental office, they lost the right of way for people to be able to drive to it. So then everybody had to start driving along this really narrow dirt road along the river. And it always looks like people are going to fall off in the river trying to get to the dental office. But that way they could restore the Freedmen's Cemetery back to what it used to be, because it's full of history. And when you see the fact, and they still haven't restored it all, but when you see the fact that they literally plopped a Freedmen's Cemetery right next to a white people's cemetery, it just blows the mind that they kept, with those Jim Crow laws, cemeteries next to one another. I don't know when the last person was buried in there, but I wonder how many people were alive and knew that there was a cemetery there and then they just covered it up with asphalt
Wow.
in a building,
I'm a giant
a
carrot.
car parts building, no less. I mean, come on,
What's the difference? They're all passed away. They ain't gonna hurt you.
right?
What? Nothing.
I know. I mean, how keeping people apart even in death? That is ridiculous. We've all heard of KKK, right? Ku Klux Klan. So there's also another group called the Knights of the White Camellia. It's another hate-filled terrorist group. I think they've been classified now as terrorist group. They are actually based right outside of Columbia, Tennessee. I mean, we're talking heart of Dixieland, I guess you'd call it.
You mean
Put it this way, my son and daughter-in-law will not be going to Columbia, Tennessee, and we haven't been in years. Craig's mom died many years ago. We haven't gone back. Racist. Racism is alive and well there.
all those?
Yep, that kind. We haven't been there in years. Craig's mom died, and we haven't had a reason to go back. So it is beautiful land. There's a positive. There's a lot of history there. There's another positive. You got to find your positives. There's two.
Is the light on good?
It is, but there's literally bullet holes. There's musket holes in the tombstones. They're still there because that is history. Why would you get rid of that? It's history.
Yeah.
All right. So, what were the laws called that kept African Americans and white people separate?
Jim Crow law.
Jim Crow laws. And what was one potential reason why they were used?
To not let the African Americans.
Because people from the South didn't want to have the African Americans be equal.
Correct. They didn't want them to be equal because in the past they had enslaved them.
Yeah.
They wanted to marginalize them. They wanted to feel less, which is just hateful, right? Okay. Reason I'm asking you these questions. Today's lesson is going through 2 pages of information about the civil rights movement. And then all you have to do is pull out, I think it's 4 things in notes and just submit those notes to me. 4 bulleted points. That's it. And then I don't know if you guys got to test on this one or not.
I did.
I've got more books I can read to y'all. The Malala. The Malala one. Right to learn. It's Malala.
We saw that at the library.
When you number things, that's a numbered bulleted point, or you could do dot, 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 or star, 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 instead of giving actual sentences. All right, guys, let's keep reading, okay? So when you do your bulleted points, what I think the way I set up the notes was I'm going to want you to give me 1 bulleted point about Jim Crow laws. So try to think of 1 thing that stands out to you about the Jim Crow laws, and then 1 thing about World War II. That's all. Hold on. And then the civil rights movement.
I thought there was 1 more.
Just 3. I thought it was 4, but it's 3. Sorry to disappoint you that it's even less work.
Yeah, really disappoints me.
Terrible, right?
The first one's gonna be the easiest.
The content is not fun at all, but it's so important to understanding our country and our people. Did y'all hear me? I'm going to show you where. I don't want to rush through this information because, I mean, it is tough to hear. It's tough to understand. So I don't want to rush through it. That's why I'm not combining 2 days lessons on one. I mean, time-wise, we are running behind, yeah, but this is very important information, and I don't know when you're gonna study civil rights again. I don't know which year you're gonna study it again, all right? I don't even know why that's there. Prior to World War II, most African Americans were low-wage farmers, factory workers, domestics, or servants. A domestic is someone who works in or around a house to help someone. No. By the early 1940s, war-related work was booming. So that would be making guns, making bullets, making food to send to soldiers. But most African Americans weren't given the better paying jobs. They were also discouraged from joining the military. After thousands of African Americans threatened to march on Washington to demand equal employment rights, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802 on June 25th, 1941. It opened national defense jobs and other government jobs to all Americans, regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin. So Franklin Roosevelt, he himself had suffered from really serious mental, physical illnesses. There's not many pictures of him shown like this, but he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't stand, he couldn't walk. Yay, my science books. Oh, you can drop it on a kid's head. It's all good.
I know, right?
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, make them jump a little. Guys, that's the last science logbook for the year. Yeah, I know, right? All right. So President Roosevelt, being someone, he was the first president who could not walk or stand. He was in a wheelchair. He already knew what it was like to be different from other people, didn't he? He already knew what it was like to have to kind of fight against an establishment of, quote, normal people. And he was exceedingly intelligent. The fact that he is the one that signed the Equal Employment Rights Bill is pretty cool. He opened up national defense jobs to all Americans. African American men and women served heroically in World War II, despite suffering segregation and discrimination during their deployment. Yet many were met with prejudice and scorn upon returning home. So African American men and women would sign up, and from stories that I've read and movies I've seen, when they went overseas, they didn't face much discrimination. From what I've seen, they really liked their time when they were outside the country because it was so much nicer than in the US. And then when they came back home, they walked right back into prejudice. Franklin. Yet many were met with prejudice and scorn upon returning home. This was a stark contrast to why America had entered the war to begin with, to defend freedom and democracy in the world. So here was America saying, we're going into this war to defend freedom and fairness in the world, but we can't even treat our own people who just fought for that. And some of them died for that. We can't even treat our own soldiers to that. As the Cold War began, President Harry Truman initiated a civil rights agenda, and in 1948 issued Executive Order 9981 to end discrimination in the military. These events helped set the stage for grassroots initiatives to enact racial equality legislation and incite the civil rights movement. So civil rights began in the military before it went out to everywhere else in the society. Okay? You need to be taking notes in your head of something from each part of this article. You're going to have a page to write it on in just a moment, Logan. Are you supposed to what? It'd be great if you could. If you can only get A, that's fine. Civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a struggle for justice and equality for African Americans that took place mainly in the 1950s and 1960s. It was led by people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, the Little Rock Nine, and many others. Many African Americans, along with many white people, protested against laws and beliefs that discriminated against African Americans. Okay, so the page that you should be on here says civil rights movement. It's the last one. It says 6 points. Looks all red. Jim Crow laws, A and B. World War II, A and B. Civil rights movement, A and B. Guys, honestly, if you just give me A of each one, that's fine. If you give me A and B, that's better. But if you just give me A, I'll give you full credit. Okay? Less for me to grade. Just being honest. Because I'm getting on the road today. I'm leaving for Dallas. I have 2 doctor appointments after school.
And if you get one that has A, and then the other one you have A and B ones.
I might just give bonus. Y'all heard me? When I say I'm leaving right after school, I've already got my bags packed. My appointment's at 3:20, so I leave here 15 minutes early today, go to my first doctor, and then I have to go to another one because I have a cold or something. We're going to Dallas today.
I'm going to Tennessee for vacation.
It's not very far. Where are you going in Tennessee?
I don't know. They said that it's going to be a 7-hour drive. I'm taking like 40 people in the
Gatlinburg.
Yeah, my grandma said it's a vacation. You know, 7 hours.
Bless you. When you're done, submit. Bless you. When you submit it, you can get off that page.
spring of 1964, visited sanitation workers, most of whom were
Cemetar. Tar. The cemetery thing that I was describing, Bryson is in Tennessee,
Yeah.
Columbia, Tennessee, south of Nashville.
Is it like 7-hour drive? Is it there? Oh, it's not.
7 or 8 hours. I doubt that's where they're taking you though.
Okay.
My guess is it's probably going to either Nashville or Gatlinburg.
And I'm bringing like all my At first I thought because camp space
All right, who is still working on this? Okay. What?
When we come back from
No, that's Martin Luther King speaking the night before he was assassinated.
I'll tell you when we go to after Richmond, I was thinking that it's like searching up the stuff about what you said about the cemetery.
I'll show you guys. It had unique tombstones there too.
So like stone, tombstone,
They're still trying to restore the cemetery.
right now?
It's been years, but yeah.
It took them years to restore.
Yeah.
Well, it was.
They have to do things very carefully because there's so much history. Cemeteries contain a lot of history, guys.
Like my great grandpa, like my great grandfather or uncle, I don't know.
No, they don't. Well, yeah, my thing. She got history. She had a good year. I got her every.
Finish.
Anyway, I've actually got to go to the office. You need my mom, my little brother, and bring them on to, I was going to take it out for it. And I thought that was one of them. And then, so, and go. Craig told me, you better leave from your neurologist, go straight to the hospital, get your order shot of penicillin. No, we've already got our bags
Something her walker and then my cookie. I told him, I said, y'all don't forget my baby. Because they didn't leave me, and then we had to go to the doctor's office, we would be at the doctor's office. And the baby was home, I said, I'm gonna get my baby this time, when I go to the doctor, go on have baby.
My 15-year-old said, when are you leaving me? I said, it's nice to see you, I love you, and I'll see you sometime Monday evening. Cause he's at home, he's virtual. So he's like, I'm not gonna see you again Monday, bye.
All right.
Thank you.
The thing is, works at the airport, and if anyone pays me about, I will get. Why don't you want this person? He was in the airport.
Yes.
Oh,
All right, guys, who still needs to hit submit?
I just did.
Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3. Okay. Let's be quiet so they can get their work done. Okay, because I want to start reading these books. There's some really interesting books, guys. I spend a lot of money and a lot of time searching for the books that I put in my classroom. What is it, Hunter? That's the end of our spring break. Do not pass us through the spring break that fast. We want to enjoy our spring break. Let us enjoy our spring break. I can't wait until Friday at the end of our spring break. Let us enjoy our spring break.
When I get home, I try to do it back. When I get home from school, I'm going to do my
All right, guys, quiet. I'm still got some people need to finish their work. What? That's Nashville. Nashville is about an hour north of Columbia, Tennessee. Just south of Nashville is Franklin. We got Spring Hill. South of that is Columbia. South is we're talking down Logan. I've got 3 I'd like to read. Stop. Guys, please be quiet. It's distracting to people who are trying to do their work. They're doing what they're supposed to, but my students who are talking are not. Oh, that just keeps on getting darker on its own. touch it a couple times and it's darker and darker and darker.
We have to get it.
What is it?
It's a burden on the animal.
I know that's why you did. Kimber, are you finished?
What's the book number?
57412.
Yes, yeah.
Wow, that thing is really miscalibrated. Like my nails look pink almost or white.
I finished it.
Okay. Does that mean everybody's done? Elmo is really off on color calibration. Really off. All right, so this one's named Martin's Big Words, the numbers on the board. Everywhere in Martin's hometown, he saw the signs, white only. His mother said these signs were in all southern cities and towns in the United States. Every time Martin read the words, he felt bad until he remembered what his mother told him. You are as good as anyone. In church, Martin sang hymns. He read from the Bible. He listened to his father preach. These words made him feel good. When I grow up, I'm going to get big words too. He is grown up. Oh no. There we go. Martin grew up. He became a minister like his father, and he used the big words he had heard as a child from his parents and from the Bible. Everyone can be great. He studied the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. He learned how the Indian nation won freedom without ever firing a gun. Martin said love when others said hate. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. He said together when others said separate. He said peace when others said war. Sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together. In 1955, on a cold December day in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks was coming home from work. A white man told her to get up from her seat on the bus so he could sit. She said no and was arrested. Montgomery's black citizens learned of her arrest. It made them angry until they could sit anywhere. Oh, I'm sorry. They decided not to ride the buses until they could sit anywhere they wanted. For 381 days, they walked to work and school and church. They walked in rain and cold and in blistering heat.
Martin walked with them and talked with them and sang with them and prayed with them until the white city leaders had to agree they could sit anywhere they wanted. When the history books are written, someone will say there lived black people who had the courage to stand up for their rights. Guys, this thing with the bus boycott. Buses make money how? By people riding the buses. Please stop moving those desks around. So when a large percentage of their customers stopped riding the buses, they weren't making money, were they?
I didn't know that one. Wow.
And for 381 days, a large percentage of their customers weren't there. They were walking. So they didn't have customers. The way you hurt places is financially. That's how you get their attention. In the next 10 years, Black Americans all over the South protested for equal rights. Martin walked with them and talked with them and sang with them and prayed with them, while ministers told them to stop. Mayors and governors and police chiefs and judges ordered them to stop, but they kept on marching. Wait. For years, I have heard the word wait. We have waited more than 340 years for our rights. Yes, it is. They were jailed and beaten and murdered, but they kept on marching. Some Black Americans wanted to fight back with their fists. Martin convinced them not to by reminding them of the power of love. Love is a key to the problems of the world.
Wait, so they walked 381 days. How long did they do it?
365 days. They walked more than a year everywhere. We're talking pregnant women. We're talking whole families with little bitty kids. That was a hard thing to do. Old people who
Did
can
they
barely
ever-
walk
Did they ever stop?
after 381 days.
So they just kept on walking for a whole year. No speed, no.
What?
No, they just walked to their jobs, to their house.
To the stores, where they needed to go, they walked until Martin Luther King and other organizers got the city bus companies to work out a deal where African Americans could sit where they wanted to on the buses. Many white Southerners hated and feared Martin's words. A few threatened to kill him and his family. His house was bombed. His brother's house was bombed, but he refused to stop. Remember, if I am stopped, this movement will not be stopped because God is with this movement. He had Molotov cocktails thrown through his window. The marches continued. More and more Americans listened to Martin's words. He shared his dreams and filled them with hope. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. After 10 years of protest, the lawmakers in Washington voted to end segregation. The white-only signs in the South came down. I love that collage, showing how everything is pieced together, including our country. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. cared about all Americans. He cared about people all over the world, and people all over the world admired him. In 1964, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. He won it because he taught others to fight with words, not fists. Martin went wherever people needed help. In April 1968, he went to Memphis, Tennessee. He went to help garbage collectors who were on strike. He walked with them and talked with them and sang with them and prayed with them. What you guys heard me playing back there on my computer was him speaking to the group of garbage workers, trying to inspire them. The next morning, the second day, he was outside of his hotel room on the balcony and he was shot. Yes, he died.
Why did they shoot him? Because they didn't like him.
They didn't like him. They didn't like his ideas. His big words are alive for us today.
They shot him.
Look at the words, guys. Freedom, peace, together. I have a dream, love. More important than who shot him are his words and his ideas. So stop focusing on who shot him and focus on his ideas. Got it? Okay. So the title and the code is up on the board. Bless you. Who's still testing? Maya, are you still testing? Hunter, are you still testing? Okay. Anybody else still testing? Michaela, are you still testing? Okay.
Which one's next?
Next one is going to be a picture book of Martin Luther King.
Is this AI?
Yeah, you still test on it. It's got words on it.
Is this AR?
It is AR. And then Michaela had said she wanted to read For the Right to Learn, Malala Yousafzai's story. So that'll be the third one we read. This one, they're all 0.5. Let me see what Malala Yousafzai is. She's 0.5 also. She's an Iranian. These past 2 days, I think you guys are learning more from these trade books than you are from the passages I'm reading you, right? All right, a picture book of Martin Luther King. And I'll put the information up for this in a few minutes, okay? Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's, let me see if I can do it like this. Okay, it comes in that way. America's great leaders. He was a powerful speaker, and he spoke out against laws which kept Black people out of many schools and jobs. He led protests and marches demanding fair laws for all people. Zoom in on this page. Look, it's a little bit smaller. There we go. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Anybody know who Barbara Walters is? The old lady on 60 Minutes. Sometimes she's on the news on Channel 12. What about whoever's drumming in the desk? Stop. There's something someone's making custom for Mila and she just messaged me back. Anne Frank. Anybody heard of her? The Diary of Anne Frank? Okay. So Anne Frank, Barbara Walters, and Martin Luther King were all born the same year. But we don't ever think of them being so similar because we think of Anne Frank being a little Jewish girl who died from the Holocaust. And we think of Martin Luther King being this courageous, strong person that fought for civil rights. And we think of Barbara Walters being this white lady that speaks well and interviews everybody because they all have their place, their own jobs, their own niches. She wrote a diary of Anne Frank. Yeah. So she was born the same year as Martin Luther King. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's father was a pastor. His mother had been a teacher. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. Young Martin liked to play baseball, football, and basketball. He liked to ride his bicycle and to sing. He often sang in his father's church. Martin center with his brother Alfred Daniel and his sister Willie Christine. Young Martin played in his backyard with his friends. One day he was told that two of his friends would no longer play with him because they were white and he was Black. Martin cried. He didn't understand why the color of his skin should matter to anyone. Martin's mother told him that many years ago, Black people were brought in chains to America and sold as slaves. She told him that long before Martin was born, the slaves had been set free. However, there were still some people who did not treat Black people fairly. Ugh, sound. Ugh. You see what's on that playground? In Atlanta, where Martin lived, and elsewhere in the United States, there were white-only signs. Black people were not allowed in some parks, pools, hotels, restaurants, and even schools. Blacks were kept out of many jobs. That bathroom also says white only. Can I keep reading or is it an emergency, Michaela? Okay. Here are three well-known African Americans from history: Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver. Martin learned to read at home before he was old enough to start school. All through his childhood, he read books about Black leaders. Martin was a good student. He finished high school 2 years early and was just 15 when he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta. At college, Martin decided to become a minister. He was really young when he started college. After Martin was graduated from Morehouse, he studied for a doctorate at Boston University. While he was there, he met Coretta Scott. She was studying music. They fell in love and married. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. began his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The next year, Rosa Parks, a Black woman, was arrested in Montgomery. She had been sitting just behind the white-only section on a bus. When all the seats in that section were taken, the driver told her to get up so a white man could have her seat. Rosa Parks refused. Look at that line. Boycott public buses, equal rights. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest. Blacks throughout the city refused to ride the buses. Dr. King said, "There comes a time when people get tired of being kicked about." One night, while Dr. King was at a meeting, someone threw a bomb into his house. Martin's followers were angry. They wanted to fight. Martin told them to go home peacefully. "We must love our white brothers," he said. "We must meet hate with love." The bus protest lasted about a year. When it ended, there were no more white-only sections on the buses. Now these signs: "We march for jobs for all now," "End segregated rules in public schools," "We demand an end to bias now," "We march for jobs for all, a decent pay now," "We demand voting rights now," "We demand decent housing now." So there's still a lot of inequality that they're trying to fight for because they want it then. They've been waiting for it for so many years. You're so funny. Dr. King decided to move back to Atlanta in 1960. There, he continued to lead peaceful protests against white-only waiting rooms, lunch counters, and restrooms. He led many marches for freedom. In 1963, anybody ever been to the Washington Mall?
I've never been anywhere.
In 1963, Dr. King led the biggest march of all, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 Black and white people followed him. "I have a dream," he said in his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." The next year, in 1964, Dr. King was awarded one of the greatest honors any person can win, the Nobel Peace Prize. The country was changing. Look, he's taking the sign down. New laws were passed. Blacks could go to the same schools as whites. They could go to the same stores, restaurants, and hotels. White-only signs were against the law. That was 1965. Dr. King told his followers to protest peacefully, but there were some riots and some violence.
Oh my God, the dog's crazy.
See his pants ripped?
That's funny.
That's not funny. That would lead to blood. So this is a picture of exactly what happened when he was shot. Y'all asked me about how he was shot. This is the Lorraine Motel. The door of his room was right back here. Can you see where my hand is shadowed? There was, it's called a hostel. It's a really, really, really cheap hotel room. I'm going to zoom out so you guys can see what I'm doing. It would be, here's my hand, but it would be scooted way back because it was across the street. That's what they're pointing to. There was a guy in a room in the hostel across the little road. He stood in the bathtub and pointed his rifle out the window while standing in the bathtub and shot Dr. King. Someone threw a handkerchief over his head to cover the gunshot wound, and they took a picture, and that's his blood on the ground. They've replaced a lot of the concrete, I guess because it had structural problems, but where his blood actually soaked into the concrete, that piece is still there. If you go to the Lorraine Motel, they have it plexiglassed off, so you can still see his clothes on the bed. You can still see the bed, the old-fashioned bed linens and stuff, and you can still see the concrete with his blood that's soaked the concrete. You can still see all that. They also have a museum right there beside it that shows a garbage truck, and it discusses what he was in Memphis to be fighting for, the garbage truck rights, because they weren't being treated fairly, they weren't being paid fairly with garbage truck pickup. Picking up garbage for people. And Memphis was a big city at the time. It still is. It's a much bigger city now. So it's a pretty cool thing to go see. Then in April 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee. He planned to march so black and white garbage workers would get the same pay for the same work. On April 4th in Memphis, Dr. King stood outside his motel room. If I'm not mistaken, he was out there to smoke a cigarette. Another man, James Earl Ray, was hiding nearby. Like I said, he was in the standing in the bathtub across the street. And it's a little bitty street. And you can also tour when you buy a ticket to go in the Lorraine Motel. You also can go in the hostel and see where James Earl Ray stood. He pointed a rifle at Dr. King. He fired the gun. An hour later, Dr. King was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world free of hate, prejudice, and violence. Carved on the stone which marks his graves are the words, "I'm free at last." Okay. 1983, the third Monday in January was declared an annual federal holiday by the United States Congress to honor the life and ideals of Martin Luther King. All right, I'm gonna put up the title and the number for the third Monday of January.
Would he still be alive right now?
He could possibly, but he would be up there in age. Maybe almost 100. He was born in 1929. Anybody still testing? Anybody? Okay, hurry up.
More racism now or back then?
There's much more racism then. It truly is a matter, it sounds terrible, but of people dying off because older people that lived through that time, especially if they were adults through that time, they're the ones especially that tend to hold on to that hatred. Like my grandfather. What is it?
No,
Should have been more than 5 questions.
no, it's sad because the kids can't learn they can't choose the code. They don't.
Kids are born without hate. Kids are born with love only. They're taught hate. That's the difference. Was it what? I can't hear you. I still can't hear you because other people are talking out of turn.
Was his wife in the house?
No, nobody was in the house at the time. Someone threw a Molotov. You know what a Molotov cocktail is? Someone threw it through the window when nobody was home. He also had been stabbed before too. He'd been hurt before. He, for standing up for people's rights, he really paid a price. All right, so this is someone standing up for girls' rights to learn on another continent. And this happened just a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And this has to do, I guess, not really with women's suffrage. It's not women's right to vote, but little girls' rights to go to school. Okay, Malala Yousafzai. There are a lot of books about her. Okay. No, Iran. Kimber, can you go turn off one of the lights? Turn off the one that does 2 of the lights, so we only have 1 light on because it's causing this glare. Perfect. Scarcely 5 feet tall and only 17 years old. Not Iran, Pakistan. A schoolgirl from Pakistan stood before the microphone. Her courage was legendary. World leaders leaned forward to listen. As Malala Yousafzai accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway, cameras carried her message around the world. In her home country, a female could be beaten for public speaking. But Malala was not afraid. Strength, power, and courage pulsed through her. She became the youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner on December 10th, 2014. Malala lifted her voice for children everywhere. This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education. It is for those frightened children who want peace. It is for those voiceless children who want change. Malala had become the voice for equal education. She almost lost her life for it. Malala's own education started early. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, ran a school in Mingora, a town surrounded by snow-capped mountains in the Swat Valley of Pakistan. From the time she could walk, she visited classes. She even pretended to teach. Malala loved school. Not all Pakistani children had Malala's opportunities. Okay, come on, get darker. Really? And now it goes that dark. Seriously. Wow. It went like nighttime dark all of a sudden. Holy moly, Elmo. Wakey, wakey. Let's get some sunshine going. The rooster is crowing.
Come on. Let the rooster wake us up. Yeah, cock-a-doodle-doo. Let's wake up. Ace is going to sleep because he thinks it's bedtime now. Oh, what messed up dog. Ugh. Okay, that's probably gonna be as good as I get. Not all Pakistani children have Malala's opportunities. Many families couldn't afford to pay for school. Others only paid for their sons' educations. Those parents believe daughters should cook and keep house. I'd be in trouble. I'd be screwed. So here's Malala. Is she being a dutiful daughter? She's writing. Bad daughter, bad daughter. Malala's own mother didn't learn to read or write when she was young, but Malala's father believed girls deserved the same education as boys. He encouraged Malala and her younger brothers, Kushal and Atal, to study. He also let many poor children attend his school for free. Malala thrived at school. She worked hard and received many trophies and awards. Not only could she speak and write her native Pashto language, but she also spoke fluent English and Urdu, Pakistan's national language. So she spoke and wrote 3 languages. Very smart little child. But Taliban leaders who controlled the area were against letting girls go to school. They declared that females should be separated from males. They wanted to outlaw education for girls. They also tried to force women to wear garments called burqas to cover their entire bodies and faces. Different culture. Members of the Taliban intimidated school leaders. One ordered Ziauddin to close his school because girls and boys used the same entrance. When Malala's father refused, the Taliban threatened the teachers until some of them quit. Ziauddin grew worried, but Malala wasn't. The girls of Swat aren't afraid of anyone. She was more determined than ever to succeed at school. Over the school holidays, most Pakistani women used henna to paint flowers and vines on their hands. Malala covered her hands with science formulas. That's my kind of girl. I used to do that. Not with henna, but I used to do that with pins. The Taliban grew stronger every day through violence and intimidation. As their strength grew, so did the rules. Men could not shave. Women had to cover their faces. Movies were banned. Radios throughout the Swat Valley crackled with the sound of the Taliban preaching. No education for girls. Girls who attend school bring shame to their families. Do they have religious freedom there?
No.
Do they have freedom of speech?
No.
Do they have the right to complain to their government?
Yes.
No.
No.
Upon death.
So that's why women, some women cover their face with those little things.
Not Taliban. We don't have Taliban in the U.S. But yeah, Taliban's a totally different thing. Fear spread through Malala's homeland. Classrooms that were once full now had empty seats. Taliban leaders bragged on the radio about those they had coerced. We congratulate Adab Tareen, who has stopped going to school. Ziauddin fought back, appearing on TV to stress the importance of education. Malala came with him. When a reporter asked for her opinion, she said, "How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education?" Later, they found a letter taped to the school gate. "The school you are running is Western. You teach girls. Stop this, or you will be in trouble." Threats did not frighten Malala. She and her father kept demanding equal education for girls.
They spoke to clubs, wrote letters to newspapers, and called journalists. Malala warned, if this new generation is not given pens, they will be given guns by the terrorists. But the situation grew worse. Members of the Taliban began patrolling the streets with machine guns. They beat people who broke curfew. Bombs exploded in the night. Businesses that didn't follow Taliban rules were heaps of rubble by morning. Then, in December 2008, came the terrible radio announcement. All girls' schools will close. Starting January 15th, no girls will be allowed at school. Even before the deadline, bombs started to rain down on nearby schools as warnings. But bombs could not silence Malala. The British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, wanted a girl to blog about the school closings. The girl blogger would tell firsthand how it felt to be denied an education. Fearing jail, beatings, and even bombs, all her friends refused. Malala volunteered. She borrowed her pen name, Gul Mackay, from a Pakistani figure who had fought against British oppression long ago. Internet service and power were unreliable in Pakistan, so Gul Mackay spoke by phone to a BBC reporter who typed her blog for the next 2 months. The blog first appeared in Urdu on January 3rd, 2009. Soon Malala's blog became popular and the BBC translated it into English. On January 14th, 2009, she blogged, I am of the view that the school will one day reopen, but while leaving, I looked at the building as if I would not come here again. Malala was sad but defiant. They can stop us going to school, but they can't stop us learning. Activists like Malala grew more and more angry. Finally, the Taliban began to allow girls who were 10 years old and younger to go to school. But Malala was 11. She and her friends left their blue school uniforms at home. Dressed in street clothes, they hid books under their shawls and pretended to be younger than they were. Lying about their ages was gravely dangerous. If caught, the students and their teacher would have been publicly beaten or executed for going to school to learn. Life grew more dangerous every day. Pakistan's army began to fight the Taliban. Gunfire and screams filled the air. No one, not even defiant schoolgirls, dared to brave the streets. In May 2009, the army announced everyone must evacuate. Cars, motorcycles, trucks, and donkey carts piled with possessions jammed the one open road. Taliban members watched from behind their machine guns as 2 million people fled the Swat Valley. Hot tears trickled down Malala's face as she stuffed a few clothes into a small bag. She reached for her books, but her mother said there was no room. Heartbroken to leave them behind, Malala prayed her books would be there when she returned. Scrambling to get out with their lives, Malala's mother, father, and brothers crowded into a neighbor's van. Malala squeezed into her friend's car. The Taliban had already tried to take her rights, her education, and her voice. Malala prayed they wouldn't come after her. Refugees flooded the villages outside Swat Valley. The United Nations Refugee Committee opened camps filled with white tents to house people, but they quickly became overcrowded. Poor sanitation led to the spread of disease. Rumors of the Taliban infiltrating the camps sparked fear in many weary hearts. The Yusufa family was fortunate to have relatives they could stay with, but the friends who had driven them out of Mingora were going elsewhere. With no car of their own, they walked the 16 hot, dusty miles. Malala's 12th birthday came in July, but there was no celebration, no cake, no party. In fact, no one even remembered. But Malala made a birthday wish anyway. She wished for peace. When they returned home 3 months later, the fighting had ended, but Mingora had changed. Shops were demolished. Gray skeletons of burned cars littered the roads. The school's walls were peppered with bullet holes, but there was no sign of the Taliban. Ziauddin resumed classes within days, classes for boys and classes for girls. We'll pick up when we come back. Bye, Megan. Have
Bye.
a great spring break, my dear.
You too.